One of the most common and distressing complaints that people share with me is concerns about hair loss. There's hardly a topic that's more emotional for people and that affects people more. You see, a beautiful, thick, luxurious head of shiny hair is associated with health, with beauty, even with status and importance. So we, especially women, but also men, are very, very connected to our health. There's a clear connotation of hair loss with illness and pictures of things like bald people and chemotherapy and cancer. And so when we start seeing more hair loss than what we expect or what we think is normal, we naturally start getting very, very worried about what does this mean for our health and for my appearance and self-confidence. So I'm going to share with you some things today about what's actually going on, help you just get a little bit more knowledge, and share with you some things that will help you support good and healthy hair growth as well. I'm Dr. Lori Anderson from Thrivent, and let's dive in. So first, you need to understand a little bit about what actually is normal. So there's two types of hair that the body has. There are what we call vellus hairs and terminal hairs. Vellus hairs cover most of the body and they help us with sensation, but terminal hairs are what we cover on the scalp, and that's what most people get worried about. Now, hair loss affects about 80 million people in the United States, and over $8 billion is spent annually on hair loss products and hair treatment options. So this is really a big deal. The term hair loss medically is called alopecia, but there are different types of alopecia, and understanding what the types are is really important in understanding the solution or the treatment. So at birth, we have about 100,000 hair follicles. Those are the terminal hair follicles on the scalp. That's a lot of hair follicles. The hair growth comes from the follicle, and keeping a healthy follicle is how we get healthy hair. Now, there are 3 phases of hair growth, and each follicle continuously cycles through each of those phases throughout your life. 90 to 95% of all the hair follicles on our scalp are going to be in what we call the anagen or the growth phase at any given time. That phase can last anywhere from 2 to 6 years depending on the person. So in other words, most of our hair follicles are actively growing, and that's why we keep getting longer and longer hair on the scalp if you don't cut it. Okay, the second phase is called telogen. Another word for that would be resting. And anywhere from 5 to 10% of the hair follicles are going to be in that telogen phase, and they're going to rotate through that, but all at different times. So not all at the same time. Now that phase, that resting phase, usually lasts about 3 to 5 months. So it's a much shorter cycle, and it's much less in terms of the number of follicles. Now there is another phase called catagen or involution, which is where we actually lose hair follicles. That's less than 1%. And so that's not really something we even need to worry about. So what's normal? Normal hair loss, when we consider those 2 phases that hair's going back and forth between, about 100 strands of hair a day is normal hair loss. Now, I don't know anybody who actually goes around counting the strands of hair, but I say this just to let you know that we lose more hair than we think on a regular basis, even when we're healthy. Now, when we're losing more hair for a variety of reasons, which I'll get to in a minute, that rate might increase up to 200 or more, so it doubles. That can really be very significant. Now, if you have long hair, if you have dark hair, or you have very thick, higher diameter hair, it's going to be much more noticeable than if you have thin, light colored hair like myself, where you just don't notice the same number of hair follicles or hair loss. But that's actually normal. So the color of your hair, the density, or the diameter of your hair shaft itself all affects the perception of how much hair you actually have. The diameter peaks for females around 40, like late 30s to early 40s, and for males, that peaks in the mid-20s. And from that point on, it goes down, and that's genetic. There really isn't anything you can do about that. So as your hair diameter goes down, that's the thing that contributes the most to the appearance of aging with our hair. So that is just something, unfortunately, we have to kind of accept. But there's a lot of other things that we do have control over. And there's 3 main patterns of hair loss that I want to talk about. The first is the one that bothers people the most. It's called diffuse or telogen hair loss. Telogen hair loss means it's kind of diffuse. It's all over. There's several triggers of that. I'll get to that in a minute. Patterned hair loss is what we think of as, say, male pattern hair loss or androgen alopecia. That's where you lose hair on the back of the head and maybe in the temple areas here. That's called a pattern hair loss, and it's genetic. And so maybe 50% of males will have that type of hair loss, but up to 30% of females will also have that pattern hair loss. And then the final one, which is probably the less common, is a focal pattern. That means you might get spots, maybe a round spot right here where you have total hair loss. It can be, that's more autoimmune. We call that alopecia areata. That is an autoimmune condition. You can also have patterned hair loss from different types of infections, like a fungal infection or even a bacterial infection in the scalp, or from things like traction or physical trauma or injury to the scalp, pulling of the hair, either from like tight braiding or tight ponytails, or just actually pulling on the hair can also cause patterned or focal hair loss. Okay, what are the triggers? Why do we have hair loss? There's a lot of different triggers, and a really common one is physical stress or illness, like a big injury or illness or surgery. Those can be triggers of that diffuse patterned hair loss. Now, here's the tricky part. Here's the thing I want you to remember the most from this video. That hair loss occurs 3 to 5 months after the event, because remember, there's a 3 to 5 month cycle where the hair is in that resting phase. When we go through these triggers, physical or stress or illness, and all the others I'm going to mention too, what that does is it pushes a hair follicle from the anagen or growth phase into the resting or telogen phase. That's going to last 3 to 5 months before we actually lose the hair follicle. The hair follicle comes out, the hair shaft comes out when the hair follicle starts going back into the growth phase, the anagen phase. That's when we lose the hair. That's what's so confusing for most people, is because they wake up one day and notice that they're losing a lot more hair, and they say, yikes, what happened today or yesterday? And they don't realize that what happened was 3 to 4 to 5 months ago. And that's the trigger of what they're experiencing today. So the next big category of triggers is chemical stress or toxins. So big chemical exposure or toxin stress. If you do a detox, it can trigger, because not only are you releasing toxins, you can have more circulating toxins during a detox if you're not doing it properly. Doing a proper detox is a whole nother topic, but it's a key. And it's part of the way of the body getting rid of toxins, because our hair can store toxins. That's why we can measure things like heavy metals in the hair. But chemical stress or toxins is a big one. I touched on this earlier, but scalp trauma or physical injury like tight braiding, tight ponytails, or even pulling of the hair, that can trigger it. Infections is a big trigger. If you had a big illness, a really bad case of the flu, or maybe you got COVID or some big viral illness, that can be a trigger for hair loss. Now, yes, we can have thyroid problems, but most people assume if they're having hair loss, it is a thyroid problem. That's often not the case, and you can have hair loss if your thyroid is overactive or underactive. So you have to check your labs to know before you really know if it's actually a thyroid problem. But thyroid problems can cause hair loss, autoimmune problems can cause hair loss, and nutrient deficiencies can cause hair loss. So if you have gut problems and you're not absorbing your nutrients, or you have a poor diet that's deficient in nutrients, that can contribute. What nutrients, you ask? Well, iron is a big one. The B vitamins are a big one, which is why biotin supplements are so popular. It's a B vitamin, but we need all the B vitamins for good hair growth. Collagen is super popular to take for hair, and it may be helpful, but if you don't address all these other triggers, it may not really help you very much. So nutrients, vitamin D is another important one. So there's a lot of nutrients that the hair needs to be healthy, and those are some of the top ones. So let me just sum up here. It's normal to have some hair loss. The hair goes through cycles of growth and rest. And triggers for increased hair loss would include illness, stress, trauma, chemicals. Those are some of the big ones, but those events happen 3 to 5 months before you see the hair loss. For most people that I see with hair loss, it's temporary. It's going to turn around, but it may take a while before you see those changes. So I hope that this gives you some reassurance. I hope it helps you be more relaxed about this and not so anxious. I get it. I have thinning hair. I have a family history of hair loss, and no, I don't want to lose my hair any more than the rest of us. But you are more than your hair, and there's a lot of things that you can do when you get healthy from the inside out that's going to help support beautiful wonderful hair. So please share your comments, your thoughts, your struggles down below. Know that you're not alone and there's a lot you can do here. So we will see you in the next video soon. Bye.